Definitely kind of surreal being here in comparison to the new school.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, are you at the central building or where are you?
We're at the district office. Right
Yeah,
now.
so yeah, the one in the middle of downtown Elgin.
Yeah, okay. Because that's at the old, what did it used to be? Central?
That's my old Elgin High. I'm an alma mater. That's my alma mater.
Hi. How are you two?
Oh,
Good.
Thank you for doing this again. I didn't realize you are an alumni.
I am. Oh yeah. Of the old building.
I feel like we have to bring that up.
Class of 59. I don't know if we want to say
Oh,
that.
that's
but,
right. That's how because you guys gave the stone thing.
we did
I
the
did know
stone circle. Yeah, for the new building.
Circle that was the her class gave that. All right, perfect. And we're live now, so Jocelyn will introduce you.
All right. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our fifth presentation of the day. Here we have avid gardeners, Nancy and Jean from Wild Ones, an organization dedicated to promoting the growth of native plants in your home garden. Ladies, the floor is yours then.
I'm going to share my screen here and get going. Okay. And does it come across right? You see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to get to talk to you about our passion for wildness. Wildness, what is it? Where does it belong? In our houses, in our yards, our common areas? Should we have wildness in our neighborhoods, towns, cities, country, world? Where can we allow the natural world to be itself without our control? Where can we allow ourselves to be more of who we really are? Where is it okay to be wild? Well, I represent an organization called Wild Ones, so you may not be surprised to hear that I believe it's natural for us humans to live with wildness. We grew up with wildness. Our bodies, our minds, and hearts developed in wildness. And today, we've disconnected from it. Instead, we're scripted and scheduled. It's natural for us to live with wildness. And when we don't, it causes lots of problems, both for us and for the naturally wild world that we cut, hammer, pave, and otherwise force to be other than what it had always been. And where we live now, in our neighborhoods, in towns and cities, there used to be cornfields or wheat or soybeans. But before the land was plowed for farms, there were prairies, woodlands, forests, wetlands. There was abundant wildness, land full of life, plants and animals, birds and trees, animals so tiny you couldn't see them, and bison so big that large herds running across the prairie shook the earth. Today, we have replaced the habitats that teemed with the wildness of life. We have installed lawns and cement. We've introduced plants from other countries, newcomers that don't know how to cooperate with the plants that grew up here. We've created our idea of a pretty outdoor picture. We've replaced live habitat that nurtures wildness, that brims with life, life and more life, with this dead-like picture of nature that supports almost no life at all. We've smoothed and contained, regulated and isolated until connected wild communities are unknown where we live. But now, the wildness we've tried to banish from our lives is making itself known in ways that have gotten our attention. For instance, last year in the United States, the southern state of Texas was hit by cold temperatures that knocked out much of their electricity for days and days. This is just one example of how storms and extreme weather are disturbing the way of life we've come to expect and to depend on. As our earth warms, weather and storms get more frequent and extreme. Humans are beginning to ask, What can we do to get back to the more balanced world that we took for granted? Maybe you think about these things yourself. Now, there are lots of ideas about what we can do to get ourselves out of this pickle. We picked one that makes a huge difference. It's not fancy, and it's something we can do without getting permission. Pardon. We don't have to demonstrate to get laws changed. We don't have to apply for a permit. We can invite wildness into our own yard. We can start in our yard right away. So we call our solution, Start in Your Yard. And Start in Your Yard wants to wake people up to the idea that wild is good, it's healthy, and it can teach us to be wise if we're willing to listen. Now, it may seem like a small, insignificant way to approach such big issues, but we're learning that all of these crises sprout from the same root. Whether we start with habitat for birds or homes for all people, whether we begin with saving the lives of forests and streams or the lives of people of other colors or religions, whether we begin with understanding reciprocity in plant communities or creating understanding in communities of people, we are addressing the fundamental problem of holding ourselves apart from others, seeing them as unlike ourselves and therefore less valuable. The root of our crises, disconnecting from plants and people we don't understand. So how do we invite wildness into our yards, into our lives? Well, most people have no experience with coaxing wildness into their yards and neighborhoods. We've done without wildness for so long that we think we don't need it. In fact, we've tried to make our outdoors more like our indoors with neat, tidy lawns, free of anything that annoys us, predictable, perfect, we think, for us and our human friends. But we're discovering that living without wildness is not healthy for us. We're beginning to understand that as we got neater and neater in our neighborhoods, we got rid of things that we didn't understand. Plant roots and fungi that would keep our water clear and healthy. Plant communities that would keep our air safe to breathe. Wildness that would shelter and feed insects and plants, the very organisms that we can't live without, insects and plants. Well, can you make lunch using only air, water, and sunshine? That's what plants do. It's their superpower. And they're the only living beings that can do it. We're all dependent on them. And of course, they have lots of help beneath the soil. We've largely ignored these complex and amazing systems beneath our feet. We've treated our land, I'm sorry. We've treated our land as if it were a huge, excuse me. We've treated our land as if it were a huge planter that would hold whatever plants and chemicals we wanted to install in it, a bowl of dirt with no mind of its own. But now we're finally learning about the many forms of life in our soil that cooperate with plants and support all of life, no chemicals needed. The fungi, whose fruit pops up as mushrooms, that's what we can see. The bacteria and other microorganisms, the life forms that can only be seen by human eyes with the aid of a microscope. The myriad tiny bugs that are big enough to see with the naked eye. And you know what? In a teaspoon of soil, not dirt, there could be 50 billion tiny life forms. 50 billion is about 7 times as many as all the people on Earth today. 50 billion unbelievably tiny beings in a teaspoon of soil. Now, one person who has helped us understand what I've been telling you is Dr. Doug Talemy. He's an entomologist. He studies insects, bugs, and he's written a book called Nature's Best Hope, as well as these others. In his book, he explains why we need wildness in our yards. Then he gives us an idea for how to do it. Replace half our grassy lawn with native plants. You might be thinking, well, that doesn't sound like much. That can't be very important. That can't make much of a difference. But he points out that we have 40 million acres of lawn in our country. So if you and I and everyone else were to make this change, it would create 20 million acres of habitat, 20 million acres of food for hungry critters instead of lawn. We'd create the largest national park in our country, bigger than our 13 largest national parks, including Yellowstone, Denali, the Tetons, Grand Canyon, the Everglades, Yosemite, and the Smoky Mountains, all combined. So Start in Your Yard asks, how can we turn people on to the fun of living with wildness right outside our doors? Living in Doug Talemy's homegrown national park, that park will help to create. Who, what can we coax back into our neighborhoods to live with us, so that when we go outside, there's always something really interesting to see if we look, just like in a national park. Most people haven't tried to persuade wildness to return to their yards, so there's a lot to learn about how to do it. We're just at the beginning. Everybody who signs up for Start in Your Yard will be trying out ideas to see what happens. And we like this way of approaching the problems we face. We like it much better than worrying, feeling overwhelmed by what's happening and deciding, well, there's nothing I can do because I'm just one person. Well, there is something I can do, something powerful and important. I can walk out my door, grab my spade or shovel, and begin making changes that invite wildness to join me. By planting native plants and learning to use the techniques that nature uses, I can do something very important. And that important something is to change the way I think about nature, about wildness, about who I am. And as I live with wildness, I come to see that animals and plants were not made for humans, but to live for their own sake. As I plant and observe, read and listen, focus on what's happening around me, my ideas change. The way I think is influenced by what I see, by what I learn, by what I open up to. As artist and educator Natasha Girodi puts it, when we tend to nature and build rapport with her in this way, we get a taste for the abundance available. Once that wildness goes beyond being physical to include an open heart, then we start to crave that satisfying connection with nature, just like we crave quality time with our friends. Soon enough, as that goodness fills us up, it starts to seep into our thoughts and spill out through our words and actions. It starts to affect how we relate to others and to the earth. It starts to impact the decisions we make and what they will mean for future generations. You know, our relationship with wildness is a vital one. It has a direct impact on our own well-being. And by starting in our yards, we can experience wildness, a renewable resource. Finally, I want to tell you about one very big thing we've learned from Dr. Talemy and his research. Plants don't want to be eaten. So they've developed ways to survive the insects that do want to eat them. And they're very successful. Some are tough to chew. Some smell or taste really bad. Some make whoever eats them sick. They have lots of strategies. But over thousands of years, particular insects have learned to eat certain plants. Many insects have adapted to eating only one kind of plant, and they're called specialists. Monarch butterflies are a famous example. Monarch caterpillars are specialists. They eat only milkweed. So without milkweed to lay their eggs on, monarchs are doomed. Now, by contrast, people regarded these wild plants, milkweed, as weeds. It's right in the name. And so they thought it was okay to get rid of them. What happened? The monarchs began to disappear too. Why? Well, monarchs must have milkweed to feed their caterpillars. So as it disappeared, so too did the monarchs. Now, there are insects that can eat more than just one family of plants, and they're called generalists. These insects can use a variety of food sources, up to as many as, wait, how many kinds of plants do you think I'm going to say? 100? 50? 10? 1,000? No, the most general generalists can feed on no more than 4 plant families. Even our generalists are very specialized. Insects can't eat just any old plant. So without the kind of plant it can eat, an insect is doomed because it takes a very long time, way more than 100 years, for an insect species to adapt itself, to change enough that it can feed on a different kind of plant. Now, our birds must have insects to survive. Insects must have plants they can eat, but they can't eat the grass in our lawns. They can't eat plants that we brought in from far away. And in most of our yards, that's all there is. A grassy lawn with some plants, shrubs, and trees that developed with other insects in another part of the world. Start in your yard is encouraging people to plant the plants that feed the insects, that feed the birds, and bring wildness back into our yards, back into our lives. Now, in just a minute, I'm going to pass the baton to Jean Muntz, who will be making the second part of this presentation. She and I have been having a great time talking to people about starting your yard ideas, these ideas, imagining what our towns will look like with wildness, feeling how it will feel to live with wildness. And I'm inviting you to do the same. If you haven't yet discovered for yourself the power of your imagination, of imagining something into being, I'm hoping you'll try it out. Whenever we create something in the physical world, we first imagine it and feel the happiness of it. We have mental pictures, lively, creative conversations with friends, and we imagine it so strongly that it's almost as if it already exists. And it does in our hearts and minds. Well, as you think about the kind of world you want to live in, let your heart lead you to a vision that feels satisfying, that makes you feel happy. Then you can discover what you need to learn and how you want to apply it to create the world you know is possible. And now Jean Muntz is going to talk in more detail about Dr. Talemy's ideas. Jean?
Thank you, Nancy. And while you were talking, a couple of questions came in. One about, are there any regulations in towns about changing lawn into natives? And the other question was about what are some of the alternatives to grass? And I think in this next part of the presentation, some of that will be answered, but we'll also look at it at the end, question and answer. So I too am a member of this Wild Ones group of Greater Kane County. One of the most frequently used words in the work we do is the word nature. And we're trying to change those old, outdated ideas about how nature exists out there somewhere else. The public park, the forest preserve, Yosemite, the lake shore. Today, we're looking at the ways that we collectively are nature. We humans, animals, birds, fish, reptiles, insects, we are interbeings, someone called it, and we're actually family members sharing the same living earth, our home, the place we live together. It is our great honor to bring these ideas forward to you, for you, because you are the very people who will be applying your hearts, your minds, your dreams, hopes, and abilities to solving these problems tomorrow. As Nancy Lamia just mentioned, we are most excited about talking and spreading some of the messages, ideas from Doug Talemy's book, the one called Nature's Best Hope. She gave some background about the author being a college professor who studies bugs. And I would add, he is a fabulous wildlife photographer. He's a homeowner, a gardener, and also someone who mows lawn. And boy, does he like to count things. I mention this about him because he's very focused on lawns, as you're catching on. Remember his intriguing idea to turn the 20 million acres of turf grass to a new homegrown national park. Well, in this next picture, biological wasteland is the term Dr. Talemy suggests best describes our biologically barren lawn. In his book, he declares every square foot dedicated to grass is a square foot degrading our local ecosystem. What? I grew up thinking a lawn like this was something pretty special. Look at that mowing pattern. It's like a plaid shirt. Here we see an example of what is known actually as a monoculture crop, all one plant, someone's beloved lawn. I bet some of you help with lawn at home, maybe mow lawns in your neighborhood. Think for a moment how maintaining a grass to look like this requires a significant amount of human time, human energy, and machinery to mow, gasoline to fill that machinery, gallons of water to keep the grass alive, pesticides and herbicides to kill stuff, and fertilizers, chemicals to feed it. When it rains here, our lawns are unable to absorb it. Grass is considered an impermeable surface, just like the sidewalk. 75% of rain on grass becomes runoff in our neighborhood sewers, streams, and then into our beloved Fox River in this area. What's wrong with rain flowing into streams and rivers, you might ask? Aren't they meant to carry water? Right. But it's what's in that runoff, gooky stuff, pollutants, and the volume of that runoff that creates the problems. And this may be something you want to explore further. I thought you might like to see this map of our Illinois watersheds. A watershed is an area of land that drains toward a receiving body of water. So when you look at this map, keep in mind that the whole west side of Illinois is the Mississippi River. And we are up in the circle, the purple circle is our area. And if you follow the line from our area, this is how it drains through our watershed. It goes into the Fox River, and then at Morris, Illinois, it runs into the Illinois River, which goes all the way down to where it runs into the Mississippi River. And then you realize the Mississippi River goes on down past several states and into the Gulf of Mexico. So everything we do in our yards goes all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. Have you heard some of the problems that are going on in the Gulf? You may want to check that out. Well, any of us actually can watch our neighborhood storm drain and keep it clear of debris. Grab a rake and take it out there. In our town of Belgian, there are nine area artists were selected to create storm drain art to call attention to some of these issues. And here you see two great examples of that art. There are about 30 painted storm drains around Elgin, and you can find out where they are at the City of Elgin website there and go look at them. The big blue octopus says, "It's not too late to save the planet." And the other, a monarch on a milkweed flower, says, "Use native plants to save the drain. Startinyouryard.com." Back to the grass for a moment. Dr. Talemy's research has found that despite all that attention we give to grass, the soil beneath it becomes depleted. He's calculated that 80 to 90% of an average residential yard is turf grass. So you know that leaves only 10 to 20% for trees, shrubs, and any other plantings in depleted soil. It doesn't have to stay that way though. Once you help us spread this message that Dr. Talemy says the solution is to plant more native species, homeowners might get excited to know their yard can become one small but important piece of that homegrown national park we're talking about. And Start in Your Yard stands ready to help. The house on the lower right picture shows what's possible when these percentages are reversed. In fact, I would say that house has more than 80% in plantings. A living landscape, Doug Talemy might call this. Words I might use to describe it would be, it's lush, it's layered, it's mysterious. I want to go up those steps and see what's there. It's inviting and it's abundant. What makes native plants the right choice? Well, here's one of my favorite pictures. Over on the far left is lawn, is turf grass. And you see its roots as compared to everything else in the picture. On the far right is a native grass called buffalo grass. And it grows a little taller than our mowed lawns, but some people use buffalo grass instead of lawn. So as you see in this diagram, it's all about the roots. These are some of the native plants that were here when the first families arrived to settle our Elgin. These plants co-evolved over thousands of years with the other plants, trees, shrubs, insects, birds, reptiles, mammals, soil, climate, water, longitude, latitude of our area. Grass can't capture and store carbon or feed the soil, but natives can. Grass can't absorb enough rain to recharge our groundwater, but natives can. Grass can't feed the insects that feed the birds, but natives can. Plants grass can't remove toxins and neutralize heavy metals, but native plants can. We've mentioned the monarch butterfly, whose larva or caterpillar, we might call it, can only eat our native milkweed. You see the monarch munching away on the left. Well, this kind of exclusive relationship, the insect to plant specialist relationship, is true for 90% of our native insects. As Nancy Lamia told you, more than 12 of our native bee species need the pollen from goldenrod exclusively. And that's what the middle picture shows. There's a bee on the goldenrod. The other bug you see here is the goldenrod beetle. And actually it's a predator, meaning it eats other bugs, but it also pollinates. So it takes pollen from this plant to another. In our area, the oak tree on the right supports almost 500 species of just caterpillars. So we can begin to conclude that all plants are not equal when it comes to the role they play in a given ecosystem. If they're not native here and have been introduced from another part of the world where they in essence steal from the natives here, the habitat, the sun's energy, water, nutrients, and they don't give anything back. They're unable to fulfill a meaningful role in our ecosystem. Further, if no controls like bacteria or predators exist to keep their numbers down, they may go rogue and spread everywhere, becoming invasive, we say. Dr. Talemy suggests we think of these invasive plants as ecological tumors that spread unchecked in our local ecosystem, damaging its ability to function. Who speaks for the native plants? Is it time we start thinking about gardening with a larger purpose in mind? Well, decades ago, Aldo Leopold, a biologist and naturalist from neighboring Wisconsin, explained it all so brilliantly. Quote, land then is not merely soil. It is a fountain of energy flowing through a circuit of soil, plants, and animals. I'm going to refer to this circuit he talks about as a biodynamic engine. When we remove the smothering grass and plant natives, we kickstart this engine, this circuit. Why am I showing you a photo of a bench? Well, this simple style is known as an Aldo Leopold bench. And when you see one, it's a clue. It is often placed where native plants have been planted. Once it is turned on, this biodynamic engine, this circuit, becomes its own regenerating system, sending down those deep roots to drill the soil. We showed you those native plant roots and some of the important functions they did. But in addition to those functions, they enrich and build the soil. They participate in vast networks of communication and nutrient exchange with strands of fungi running through, around, betwixt and between those massive root systems. Some are calling this nature's internet or the wood wide web. So fascinating. Hope you have the chance to find out more about how plants send messages and share nutrients with each other. And as we're looking at this slide, above ground, the plants, of course, take in the carbon dioxide, and their leaves are the solar collectors, passing the sun's energy into the greater food web to the insects, animals, and birds. So think about how this allows everyone in the food web to eat the sun and to have oxygen to breathe. The circuit continues because any waste generated in the system is broken down and becomes nutrients for bacteria, microbes, and the soil. So in this system, waste becomes food. How many microbes were in that 1 teaspoon of soil? Well, here's our challenge with this approach. Can we change our standard of beauty from one of a manicured mowed monoculture of grass to a yard like these that we might describe as filled with birdsong, buzzing with bees, swaying in the breeze, humming with activity, teeming with life? These descriptions are all evidence that we're connecting to that circuit, that biodynamic engine, and it's at work. Here's how native plantings connected with mowed pathways and corridors might be a more reasonable way to use grass. The upper left-hand house is Nancy Lamia's house. Be sure to include a mowed area rug large enough to throw a ball or play a game. And that's in my house, my yard, the lower right.
Whoops.
That's okay. And the next slide is depicting, here come the bees, butterflies, moths, dragonflies, birds, to feed, to lay eggs, to pupate, to pollinate. In a garden like this, there's also plenty of sheltered passageway, habitat, and food for all the other animals and other species that use it and need it. And for our feathered friends, this is a bird food factory in real time. Do any of you see a monarch in these pictures? We'll get back to that at the end. Study that for a second. Okay. In the next picture, chickadees. Douglas Talemy, along with his student research assistants, found that birds prefer to feed their babies mostly caterpillars. And here we see Dad with one on the left. If we look at caterpillars the way birds do, we too might see that it's a soft, squishy, nutrient-dense bag of baby bird food. This makes them easy to shove down a tender little throat without causing any damage. Dr. Talemy and his assistant decided to count how many caterpillars it took one chickadee couple to raise one nest, one clutch of babies. What do you think they discovered about numbers of caterpillars? Tens? Hundreds? Well, it's thousands. They discovered it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise one clutch of babies to fledgling, meaning out of the nest. See, Mom on the right is feeding a fledgling who can now ingest crunchy seeds and crispy beetles. Dr. Talemy tells us Mom and Dad continue to feed them for 2 more weeks, but he and his students weren't able to continue counting because the chickadees were running around. Not surprising. He and his students have determined caterpillars transfer more energy from plants to other animals than any other plant eater. Well, here's the clincher. With this diversity of native plantings, the land becomes resilient, able to mitigate, let's use the word heal, the effects of ecological damage. And we humans get to know and to reconnect to the plants and the animals that make up this integrated and energetic system. Can we begin to see that native plants are not just for gardeners? They may be for everything but us. How we garden and who we garden for may become why we garden. Gardens matter. When we become part of the ecosystem rather than living apart from it, we participate with nature and we steward a yard we understand is shared with many creatures. Using native plants leads us to think about landscapes with a deeper purpose. Our gardens matter because they literally save species. They also heal us. Many of our medications come from plants, like antibiotics from mold and fungi, aspirin, cancer treatment drugs, heart medicines. There have been studies about how students in classrooms with trees outside the windows perform better, or how gardening can be an antidepressant, and even brief exposures to the natural world can produce measurable medical and social benefits. The native plants will show us what we do to heal our yards is an act of reciprocity, of giving back, saying thanks for the gifts the plants, animals, and insects give us. And Earth will reciprocate with more resilient land right where we live. Healing will come not because we minimize our impact, but because we change the nature of our impact. Open the door, grab a trowel, start in your yard. Well, maybe grab a snow shovel first. And we've certainly enjoyed talking to you today. Did any of you see that monarch in slide 47? Talk to us. Actually, it was a trick question. That's a monarch chrysalis. That's the monarch cocoon there on a milkweed, waiting to become the butterfly.
All right, are you guys?
And it sounds like we had some questions, right?
Okay, there we go. Are you guys ready for questions now? So, how is global warming, or how is our global warming situation affecting local plants?
I didn't hear that completely. How does global warming affect what?
Our local plants and like our native plants.
Our local plants? Well, it is slowly becoming apparent to those who study them that, our climate is warming here. And so what's happening is some of the plants will bloom earlier than they used to. And that may be throwing off the insects that want to look for those plants at a certain time of the year. And now they're blooming a little earlier. So that's just one of many different ways we're beginning to see some changes here.
But it is being monitored and studied. And of course, we don't know what the outcome will be because we've not been in this kind of situation before. And there are ways that the plants and animals will have to respond to the changes. And some will be more successful than others, as we know. And we ourselves are continuing to plant plants in this area. We have not taken to planting plants from the south necessarily, but it is something that everybody's kind of keeping an eye on.
And then how many years have you been involved with adding native plants to the landscape?
About a dozen for me.
Well, I would say in my evolution as a gardener, I began to see in the early 90s, 1990 or so, that native plants were pretty significant in what they did. I didn't fully understand, but I began to see that natives were something I wanted to check into.
And I had gone, I was working over at Prairie Stone when Sears was still there. And when they first moved out here, they planted, they called it Prairie Stone, and they planted a lot of prairie. And we did a lot of walking, and it was really interesting. I would walk into work, park in the parking lot, walk through all these native trees and plants, And I was absolutely taken with them. And so when I say a dozen years, probably 10 years before that, I was planting some of the things I was seeing there at Sears. And the reason I say this is it's so important what people see, because Jean pointed out to me several years ago that we really don't care all that much about things that we don't know anything about. We don't even know it exists. So one of our missions is to help people understand that there are these fabulous plants and they just aren't acquainted with them yet. So it's important what we have in our public spaces as well as along our residential homes.
So then what is a good way to advocate to local government to plant more native plants?
Well, we're lucky in this area. We have something called the Belgian Sustainability Commission, because our city is very aware of the importance of natives, and this commission, in fact, one Deborah McMullen sits on that commission, and they are individuals who are very interested in these issues and then able to advise our city council in some respects on, how to bring about change in the city. So we're lucky.
Yeah, and like anything else, the first thing is to begin to become aware of what kind of changes are needed, and then watch the politicians, what they have to say on this issue, get to know the organizations. It's just stunning, the work that's being done by organizations. We just had a presentation last night by a woman from the Morton Arboretum talking about the Chicago Region Trees Initiative and their local oak ecosystem project. And then at our Sustainability Commission, I heard a woman talk about what the Conference of Mayors is doing in the Chicago region. So there are a lot of things going on. The internet's a great source, but find out what your municipality is doing and where the needs are. And then, of course, first and foremost, learn about this by getting out in your yard or participating in work days. Somehow get up close and personal with these native plants. Good, that's a great question.
And then, since there are a lot of people that do like non-native plants, do non-native plants have any place in our local ecosystems, or do you think people should be restricted to just using native plants?
Well,
go ahead.
When we talk about starting, we're not suggesting people tear up what they already have, but they start by inserting a native where they may lose a non-native, or just creating a 1 foot wider border on the edge of their grass and be planting natives in there, and to start where it makes sense for you to start. It shouldn't be something you have to expend a great deal of money or energy to start.
Jim Kleinwachter from the Conservation Foundation, which is another just fabulous organization in this area, he compares it to, if you think about inside your home, the native plants are your furniture. They're the things that really function for you, your stove, your bed, the things you use. And then there are the little things that you set around because they're just pretty and you want to look at them. And those are the non-native plants. So there is a role for both. And in terms of legislating or establishing policy to prevent something, the one thing, and we talked about this last night, would be working with the nurseries so they can't sell Bradford pears any longer. They can't sell buckthorn. They can't sell oriental honeysuckle. They can't sell these things that are running our woodlands and open areas. So again, great question. It's a mix. Can be.
All right. What is the most exciting species you have seen in your own yard since you've been planting native plants?
Well, here's what continues to surprise me. They organize themselves the way they want to be. I might put them in a pattern, but over time, over several years, they will organize themselves in what is an even more attractive pattern to me. The other most amazing thing is things appear that I didn't plant. And I think that's because when you put natives in, the insects that are specialists with those natives just come, plant it and they will come. And then the birds come. And so that interactive business brings other seeds in and other possibilities. So I love having constant surprises out in my yard. Nancy, what would you say?
Well, I had a plumber here working on something. We were out in I think he was doing something with my sump pump. And he finally just stood up and looked around. He said, I have never seen so many birds in one yard before. So and I have a friend who really thinks this native plant stuff's a little kooky. But she was at my house one day and she went to my patio door and she opened it and she said, your yard is so, and I was expecting just the worst thing to come out of her mouth. Your yard is so alive. So that's maybe the most surprising thing when I walk out my door and I feel the energy of this life around me instead of walking out into, what's an outdoor room that's paved with grass and so forth. So, but of course, I have coyotes and I had a yellow-billed cuckoo that was maybe one of the biggest surprises for me. How can it's just amazing what you get to see. And if anybody likes snakes, I'll just tell this one little story. I had black plastic down. I was making a rain garden. So I was smothering the lawn there to make this rain garden. Well, after a year, I was ready to start digging out and I went to the corner of the plastic and lifted it up, and there was this little brown snake. Well, he slithered away right away. So I dug, and then I lifted up some more plastic there. I bet this happened 5 times. Every time I went, lifted up the corner, this snake had moved again. So it's just fun. You never know what you're going to get to interact with.
This is fun to us, what we're describing. Others may say, eek. But,
So kind of going off of that, can you tell us more about your rain garden?
My house is built into the side of a hill. So one side of the house is at the lower point of that hill and opens up right on to that level. And I don't have any rain gutters on my house. I just have channels in the ground. So when the rain runs off the roof, it falls into a channel, and then that channel is directed down the hill into just a slight depression that is my rain garden. So everything kind of comes off the house, channels down the hill into my rain garden, and the rain garden collects it and then lets it slowly absorb into the ground over a 24-hour period. It's not a permanent pond, and nor should it be. But that's how our water gets recharged. Is, in other words, my rain garden captures everything that falls on my ground and my roof, puts it in the rain garden, and then returns it to my land.
And it is beautiful. Oh my gosh, I wish you could see it. One of the slides, and I forgot to say this, it was the one with the heron sculpture, is Jean's, part of Jean's property. It's absolutely stunning. She's not only a gardener, she's also a designer. Yeah, it's to die.
Well, we loved using pictures from both our yards, and then also some of our friends in Wild Ones, we used pictures from their yards as much as we could to show you.
And my rain garden is a dug place because I have a sump pump that I wanted to drain out into my yard. So it now, instead of running down, my yard has a slope, instead of running down this slope into the area behind my property so that it's always squishy back there, it runs into this rain garden. And like Jean said, it sits and percolates down and it goes back to the aquifer instead of running off and, like she traced, running down toward the streams into the river and so forth. So yeah, and then of course it has some shrubs and then some grasses or sedges and some blooming plants in there.
And a rain garden can be pretty small. I mean,
Mine is.
a homeowner can put it right at a downspout, you know, and it collects, keeps it from running into the street. Yeah.
We do, Start in Your Yard does site visits. We invite you to get on to startinyouryard.com. And when you register, you push the purple button to register your interest. And you can actually request a site visit. And the reason, what reminded me of that is that we did a site visit. It was exactly what Jean just described. This guy had a downspout. It was kind of an odd place. And trying to figure out how we could put in just a small rain garden there so that this water wasn't running off onto his neighbor's property and causing a problem, because it was coming out of a downspout and he needed somewhere to retain it. So yeah, so get on Start in Your Yard and register your interest, and we'll come out and walk your property with you and talk about what you might want to do. And going back to that earlier question, we do not, I learned this from Jean. I went out with her on a site visit and she says, well, tell me first what you want to keep. And I just thought that was just a fabulous way to begin. So that's kind of what we do.
And then for one final question, is there a way people can help or volunteer with your project? And if so, where?
Again, on our startinyouryard.com site, we have a little area that talks about being a crew. It's what's it stand for? Anyway, it's ready and eager to weed. I just can't think of the C. Anyway, again, there's a button there that you press and you enter your information, and we contact you to be part of a crew when a crew is needed. Yeah.
Yeah, we might be planting something or weeding something or helping in some way.
You want to just say a word about the cobblestone house in that regard?
There is the museum in town. I know our time is brief here. The museum, the public Elgin Museum in town, is restoring one of the old cobblestone houses in Elgin that was an early Elgin house. And they have asked us, the restoration isn't quite done, but they have asked Start in Your Yard to put in a native plant landscape all around that house. So that'll be a demo garden, and you can see what we've done so far. It's at the corner of Chicago and Crystal Street.
All right. Thank you so much again for answering all these questions in your presentation. It was wonderful and very educational. So again, thank you for coming this year. We know it's been a rough couple of years, so we really do appreciate it. And we hope to have you guys again next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's captivated, ready and
Captivated, ready, and eager to weed. Yes.